What is up, guys? Welcome back to another tutorial. Today we're going to be looking at creating a Djent guitar tone with Bias Amp 2. Check this out. We'll just take a quick listen to it without the backing track. So that's the tone we're going to be working on today. Before I start, I do just have to say this song isn't my song. This is a song called If I Were You. No, it's not. It's a song called The Choice by a band, If I Were You. Great song. Love it. You should go give them some love and support if you like the way the song sounds. So, without further ado, let's get diving into this tutorial. Like I said, this is going to be using the new Bias Amp 2 by Positive Grid. We're going to be working with the demo/trial version of the copy for two reasons. One, I'm broke and I haven't gotten around to buying it yet, and two, because it means any one of you can follow along and it'll be great. This will work obviously in all of the full versions. If you do like the tone that we're getting here today and you don't have the money or equipment to record actual amps, I highly suggest investing in this. It's $99 for the standard version. Really good investment, sounds amazing. There's loads of good various bonuses and stuff. It's a really great plugin. Absolutely go for it if you can. So before we get into the actual amp stuff, I want to just talk about some preliminary bits in the guitar tone. So first of all, I've got a pitch shifter on here because my Schecter that I use to record these guitar tracks, because it's got a Floyd Rose, it can't tune low enough to drop, I think it's F sharp, this song is, drop F sharp. So I've just used a pitch shifter here to drop the DI track down to the right tuning for the song. Let's just take a quick listen to the DIs without any effects, just with the pitch shifter, so we can get an idea for what we're working with. So as you can hear, it's pretty muddy. You know, standard DI, not very djenty at all. This was recorded straight from my Schecter into my Focusrite Scarlett 2i2, which I've spoken about briefly in my studio tour, and straight into Logic, as is, no anything external, just the guitar. So first thing we've got after the pitch shifter, which is, you know, not necessary, we've got a compressor. This is the Moloch compressor. It's a free compressor. I'll put a link to download it in the description. I used it on my drum tutorial for some of the drum tracks. Really good compressor, and is fantastic considering it's free. We're going quite heavy on the threshold here, taking it down quite a lot. We wanted a fair amount of gain reduction to reduce as much of the dynamics in the actual guitar track as possible, so that it's all smooth going into the amp and the overdrive pedal, just so that there's not loads of dynamic range, because there usually isn't in distorted Djent guitars. Makeup is at full because as I said, loads of gain reduction, want to keep that volume so there's not loads of difference in it. Attack is pretty quick, ratio 4:1, hard knee, fully compressed signal coming out, and yeah, that's basically it for the compressor. Next up, we've got a noise gate, which is just to get rid of any noise in the background after it goes into the amp from the compressor. Reducing dynamics in that will mean any noise coming through the guitar, or any distortion-y interference type noises going through the pickups or anything like that will get picked up by the amp and the the distortion pedal. So yeah, that noise gate is just to try and get rid of those, because I'm not an editor, I'm a mixing engineer and a mastering engineer, so I don't fiddle with chopping. Right, now we're getting into the actual guitar tone. The next thing we've got is a TSE 808 overdrive pedal. It's simulating the Maxon overdrive pedal. It's a really nice plugin, free again. There'll be another link in the description to download this so you can follow along exactly. These are our settings. Drives at about whatever time that is, 9 o'clock I think it is. Volume at about 2, tone also at about 2, maybe 3 o'clock. Not 3 o'clock, definitely 2 o'clock. So we'll just listen to the difference that this makes to our DI here. So it just sort of distorts it a little bit. It actually adds a little bit of brightness going into the amp. I'll give a display of like the difference that makes when the amp is actually turned on and when we've gone through the settings of the amp, so that we can really understand the function of the pedal. But its main function is to brighten up the tone of the DI and the guitar going into the amp, so that you end up with a brighter guitar tone afterwards. So let's dive into Bias. Like I said, really great plugin. You've got this nice user interface up at the top that shows you your custom panel. So that's the actual amp head. You get your preamp, some EQ goes in there if you want it, tone stack, power amp, transformer, the cabinet, EQ, and then there's amp match at the end, which is used for if you want to profile an amp. For example, if you had like a Mesa Boogie, beautiful sounding, amazing amp, and you wanted to match that on your digital amp simulator so you can use it on the go, you just plug in a tone, raw guitar tone of that amp into this, and it will match it pretty much perfectly. It's amazing. Like I say, it is only a feature of the full version, so if you want to use the amp match, you'll have to buy the full version of Bias, which again I highly recommend doing. I certainly will be as soon as I have the money for it. So first thing we've done is we've headed into the templates, gone to this metal section and pulled out the triple tread plate. It's a great place to start. Sounds very nice. So yeah, do that by clicking on this bar up at the top, metal, triple tread plate, and that will bring you to this main sort of screen. I've got the gains set about 2 o'clock, 2:30, bass down to 11, maybe 10. The mids more around 12 o'clock, treble again is at more towards 2. Presence maybe 1 o'clock, and master at 1 o'clock as well. So that's our bass settings for the amp. Then we move on to the preamp. So this is where you got your tubes and that. This is going to be creating the main distortion sound. I'm going to give you some comparisons of what the different settings sound like so that you can have an understanding for the types of things that they do. So first of all, we've got a pre-EQ, so an EQ on the actual amp before it goes into the power amp. We've just got a little bit of a low shelf drop, scooping some of the mid as well. That's another feature of the demo version. Just a side note, it will disable and say demo version on the front of it when you're using it. Anyway, back on, a little bit of a mid scoop again, and then scoop some of the highs as well. So basically just dropping loads, but mainly we're dropping that low end because especially with down-tuned guitars, when you're tuning as low as things like drop G, F sharp, drop A, 7-string guitars, 8-string guitars, even 9-string guitars, you get a lot of mud, a lot of low end, and it will sound horrible in your mix. If you let that build up and take over the bass, it will ruin your mix completely. So we're taking out a fair amount of that before going into our tubes. Now, first of all, switch is set to normal. Second of all, we'll talk about the tubes. So normal, that's basically if it sounds bright or if it's just going to distort the tone. So the tubes, as a standard for metal stuff, high gain things, it'll be these 12 AXs, or I think it's the 12 AU7s for metal. Basically, these top three are your main metal go-to tubes. So yeah, you're going to want to select those for both of your input stage and cathode follower tube setting. They'll give you the most djenty distortion, high gain type goodness, which is usually a lot of djent tones aren't really too high gain, but for this particular tone that I'm going for, I wanted to go for a high gain sort of tone. Gain knob, obviously that is your gain, the amount of push that you're putting into the distortion of the amp. We can just have a listen to how that sounds varying it. So there's not much difference, it's like an ever so slight how heated are the tubes. If it was in an actual analog amp, it would be how hot the tubes were getting, how much power is going through them type thing. Tube stages, that's a similar thing. It's basically the amount of distortion that you want on your amp. I've got it set to 5. 4 is ever so slightly less distorted. 1 is going to be practically clean. Just have a listen to that as well. So usually I think for a standard Djent tone you'd probably be more around 4 for your tube stages, as it's a slightly more distorted but not so high gain sort of tone. But for this particular one, again, I wanted to push it, so I've put it up to 5 for maximum distortion. Then again, on this distortion, I've boosted it up a little bit. It's probably around 2 o'clock again there, maybe 1:30. And then we've just got another bit of an EQ. Low cut frequency is down here, and the high cut frequency is a little bit more up high. So that's just bringing the bands apart a little bit from what they would be as standard. The bias is, as far as I'm aware, it's how much effect it'll have, or how much presence the distortion will have on your actual tone. So I've got mine set pretty hot, obviously, because I want to be affecting it as much as possible, like I've said. We'll have another listen again, just so we can see the comparison between the two. So it's not a massively audible difference, but there is a little bit of a difference there, just in terms of how beefy the tone is, if you will. Going on to the post EQ, I've actually boosted the lows a little bit again, going into the tone stack and the power amp. Just makes it sound a little more beefy. Scoop the mids a little, scoop the highs. That's to get rid of fizz and horrible, nasty tones that you don't particularly want to be sitting in your mix. Some people will probably do this with the EQ that is optional up next on the next stage, but I've just done it in this post EQ and gone straight into the tone stack. So we'll move on to the tone stack now. We've got it's really basic stuff. It's basically just an EQ, but the sort of mechanics of it change based on the topology setting that you pick. So those are different ones. Different ones are good for different things. British Modern, German Fireball, American 5153, 5153, 5153, however you want to say it. They're the ones that I've found have been best for metal. For this particular tone, I've gone for the 5153, which I believe is modelling a PV amp. Skip the bass a little bit. Mids are just a tiny bit decreased, and then boosted the treble again to give it a little more edge in the tone stack. Sounded good at that stage. Next is the power amp. Is what it is. Another example of a plugin that simulates a power amp, if you wanted to use an external one, is, if I just remember quickly, in my audio units, it's another Ignite. I think it's this TPA1. Really good power amp plugin. Again, it's free. If you want a tutorial on a fully free guitar tone, by the way, let me know in the comments and I'll get that made for you. We can have that uploaded soon enough. So here we've got more tubes. I've got the EL34s. Pretty sure it's the EL34s and the which ones is it? EL34s and EL84s even. I think are the ones for metal on here. You can select those by clicking on that input stage bit and selecting your tubes there. Topology, we're going for a push-pull. Makes it more djent, he says. Gives it more of a sort of like a flowy motion. Instead of it being flat dynamic tone, it is going to be more pushy. Like you'll get that dynamic from the pick hitting the string. You get the dynamics from the palm mutes. It won't be, there's more dynamic range basically. Master, I've boosted the master up a little bit because that just brings the volume down when you're going into this. Distortion is around 9 o'clock. It's pretty low. But that's all I needed to make it sound good. Splitter gain, we've got at a plus. I can't really say in words what the splitter gain does because I'm not entirely sure, but I'll give you an example of how the sound differs switching through. It's almost like a mid-gain boost, so it just boosts the mids and makes them more gainy and beefy, which is the type of sound we want. So I've got it pretty high, almost at the end of this arrow on the plus side there. Power gain, again, is whole gain of the amp through the power amp. So I've got that dropped down a little bit just so that there's not too much pressure on the actual thing, not too much limitation. It's still relatively dynamic. Bias is set towards hot. We've got it pointing probably towards the edge of this little graphic here. Amp settings, we've got it set to modern with a push style. Presence is boosted slightly. That'll basically just add harmonics up in the high end, boost the presence of it in the high end of the mix, and the resonance is set pretty high as well. Transformer, we're using an American style transformer. To be fair, I haven't noticed much difference depending on whichever transformer you pick. It'll probably change the type of settings and the way that the settings behave in here. We're using the GZ34 rectifier tube type. It's just tighter, as it says. This one's great at producing sag. I want tight, not sag, so we've gone for the GZ34. Got it set to a soft compression because I don't want it being too hard. Input is almost up at max, probably around 9, 9.5 if I had to give you a value. Ratio is around 4 towards 10 o'clock. Attack, 3 o'clock. Release, 1 o'clock. Compression, slap bang in the middle at 5, maybe just slightly below. And then the output is dropped all the way down as well. My dynamic tone is round about 0. I'm not really doing much here. I think it is actually at 0 as low as it will go. I'll just show you what the dynamic tone sounds like if you tweak it. It almost removes the dynamics, takes out those mids, just makes it more high-end gain, kind of like a Metal Zone MT2, if you've ever used one of those or seen my video on trying to make it sound good. So that's settings for the transformer. Next up we have the cabinet. We are using the orange V30S cabinet model. You get loads of cabinet models with this thing. It's a 4-speaker cabinet. It's simulating an orange cab. If you have the full version, you can load IRs if you've got your own that you want to play with. Again, if you want anything about impulse responses or impulse response loaders for a free guitar tone, let me know in the description. I will get that made. The impulse response loader is only a feature of the full version. You can't use it in the demo. Same with these Celestion cabs that they've got, which are really good cab impulses if you wanted to give them a go. But a lot of these, they're only available in fuller versions that you can pay for. So we've got 2 mics going on here. Mic 1 is an MD41, which is a dynamic microphone, I'm pretty sure. Might be a condenser. Look at that, it's a condenser. I was wrong. But yeah, so that's our first mic. We got that off to the edge a little bit. It's quite far back from the cab as well, looking at this top view. You have a top view and a side view, front view. Front view lets you position the mic in front of the cab. Top view lets you position how far away from the cab you actually are. So again, over to the right, sort of on the middle ring on the cab, quite far away again. Mic 2 is an SM57. That is a dynamic mic. I actually know that one. That is quite towards the center, maybe ever so slightly off to the bottom left, but very, very slightly. And that one's pretty close as well. And then we've got the mixer. You can switch over to your mixer for the mics up here on this slider from position to mixer. It's all standard settings. Equal mix on both of the microphones. EQ's not doing anything. I just haven't taken it out because I'm lazy. And that's everything that's going on in the bias amp itself. So if you're just going back to my earlier point of this TSE overdrive pedal going before the amp, its purpose, like I said, is to brighten the tone. So if we just listen to the tone of the amp with and without it, you can hear when it's on, it just gives it a lot more edge and a lot more power, which is the type of sound that we want to go for with this tone. As you can probably hear listening to the tone, it's pretty muddy, and this is where the most important stage of getting a guitar to sit in a mix comes, and that is EQ. EQ is crucial to a guitar. One thing that Taylor Larson has said that I've learnt from him is that guitars, he doesn't like guitars much, and they should sit in their own little window. They don't need much space to be present in a mix, which has made such a massive difference to the sound of my mixes and the way that guitar tones sound. So we've got a Red 2 EQ from Focus right here that is literally, it's doing a high pass, a low pass, and a slight high shelf, and that is it. Listening to the difference that this adds to the guitar, let's just have a listen. Scoops out all of that low end, all of that bass, which you might think is insane, but seriously, when you've got it sat in a mix with the bass guitar as well, you don't want those low frequencies conflicting with the kick and the bass guitar, because you'll just end up with a massive floor of mud in your mix, and that's something that you really don't want to have to deal with when you send it off for mastering or master it yourself, because it's a real pain to deal with, trust me. So the high pass filter, it's around about 105 Hertz, just up there. Low pass filter around about in between 16 and 8.2K. This high shelf, that is where we've got the thingamajig labeled for the frequency, and then we're boosting about 2 decibels maybe on that high shelf boost. This, by the way, this Focusrite Red 2 EQ comes free with the Scarlett 2i2 Studio bundle. So if you want to get a hold of these plugins decent, go for that Studio bundle. You get your microphone, the interface, and a load of plugins and some headphones. Really great deal. Again, if you want a dedicated video, let me know. So that's everything for the guitar track itself. I've then got both of these 2 guitar tracks, because we've got stereo pan tracks. Got the 2 of them. They are going off to a guitar bus, which I have so rightly called Djent guitar bus. Love it. That is, again, EQ, and that's it. We've got a default Logic channel EQ, got a bit of a low cut coming up to about 124 Hertz, bit of a boost at the low end as well, 196 Hertz, and then we've just got a couple of cuts to take out nasty frequencies that don't sound about right in the mix. One thing that I've learnt as well is when doing adjustments in EQ, especially on things like guitars and vocals, it helps to keep your boosts low and wide, and your cuts narrow and large to make it sound more natural. It is an actual tip. You don't have to, by all means you don't have to, but it does help keep it sounding more natural overall. So let's just have a listen comparing it with and without this EQ. So as you can hear, it really takes out the harsh high-end frequencies and gives it a little bit of a boost back to that low end to keep it more energy, but without adding all of that subby mud that we don't want. Next, we've got another Red EQ, basically doing the same thing as last time. Bit more of a high shelf at around 10 Hertz, cut going down to 16 on the low pass, got that going down to 16, and then a high pass again at the same place. We've got a bit of a boost around the high mids, maybe 1 decibel. Shape is more of a band boost instead of a peak, and that's around 2k Hertz. Final stage, we've got another EQ that again is just taking out some harsh frequencies to give us our final tone. Again, we'll do a before and after on that one. And there we have it, that is our guitar tone. Now, one thing I do have to emphasize before I end this video is this is very specifically for a low-tuned guitar. If you're playing in E standard and using all of these settings, it's not going to sound good. I'll give you an example of what it might sound like. My guitar was actually tuned to drop A, my 7-string check. So if I turn off the pitch shifter and play this as is, as you can hear, it's quite high-endy and quite tinny, and that is because there's so much sub-range in a low-tuned guitar, we've had to EQ most of that out. If you're using a high-tuned guitar, there isn't as much of that sub-range, and so you don't want to cut it as much like we have in this specific guitar tone. The amp itself I use in most tunings is literally just the EQ settings that you're using. You don't want to be cutting so much or boosting so much if you're using a higher tuning, because it will make the whole thing sound just too bright. So with a higher tuning, you want to be using less of a high boost and less of a high pass, because you'll end up with too much high end in your guitar's mix. Anyway, that pretty much rounds up this mix, this little tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions about it, feel free to leave me a comment below. I will answer as many of them as possible, which is most likely all of them. If you want anything more like this, like how to do bass guitar or how to do vocals, please let me know, and I'll be sure to see you in the next video. Thank you all of you for the support on the release of my band's EP, which was my solo EP but has now been released under my band. You can view the stream video for that in the description on my channel or somewhere on the screen. There's been a fantastic response to it so far. I really can't thank any of you enough for the support you've given me making it, and there is going to be plenty more to come that will be even better and even more awesome than that one. So thank you again for that, guys, and I will see you in the next video. Have a good one.